So property is just stuff, right? Private property, it's not as important as lives. It's personal property over human lives, people over property. You care more about material things than people's lives. But let's make some clarifications and go through this logically and philosophically. Property is the extension of self-ownership. It's not a different category. It's not a separate identity than self-ownership. The same rights that prevent somebody violating my life include the violation of my liberty and my property. There's not a bifurcation between these two things. Property is the extension of self-ownership. And so property is any of these three things. Tried to define these as precisely as I could. Material that is homesteaded, that is physical material in the world, mixed with human labor. Now, there are some conditions on this. The material cannot be owned legitimately by someone else first. And there are some other things consequent to that that make some conditions on what constitutes property. But this is one of the only peaceful ways to interact cooperatively with other human beings is through this principle of homesteading. We manipulate the physical environment around us in a way that is concomitant to our survival and human flourishing, and therefore we have a right to do it as so long as it does not violate the right of self-ownership of other people. That is their lives, their freedom, their property that they've homesteaded. Property is also gifts that are legitimately obtained by the giver and given voluntarily. So if somebody decides to give you something, from an inheritance to a Christmas gift to just a gift out of love or friendship, that is a legitimate exchange of property, a legitimate transfer of title, of ownership, as long as the person gave something that they legitimately homesteaded, was given to them, or they bought in a voluntary exchange or traded in a voluntary exchange. As long as they fulfilled those requirements and did not violate the rights of self-ownership of other people by, for example, stealing or trading a stolen good, whether they knew it or not, as long as that was the case, a gift is legitimately given property, and it becomes that person's property on the acceptance. Third, property is the voluntary exchange or trade of any items except stolen goods. So people may trade things, whether they're trading money, whether they're trading services, goods, or any combination thereof. That is how property is created or traded, and that is how wealth is also created, by the way. Now, if someone accepts the original concept of self-ownership, that I and everybody else as human beings, that we own ourselves, meaning my body, my mind, my will, belongs to me at least before it belongs to anybody else. I have that exclusive right. Now, I may sell my labor, trade my labor, use my body to work, use my mind to work, and exchange for those things as long as it's voluntary. That's okay. Now, if you accept that first principle of self-ownership, that we have an exclusive right to ourselves, our minds, our wills, our own bodies, relative to other people, then you, if you're going to be consistent, must accept the rights of private property, because self-ownership, the individual's ownership and right to their own body, it follows that property rights are inherent human rights. Property is an extension of self-ownership, while it may not be our physical body or our mind. Property is the right to exclude. Property is the right to exclude access, just like you should have the right with your body regarding other people, with regard to, think of something like rape versus a consensual act, right? There is a right to exclude because we own our bodies. Just like I have the right to exclude somebody from taking my car. While there is a stratification, there is a level of difference between self-ownership and property, according to the individual. To attack, steal, or destroy property of another without the consent is an attack on self-ownership of that individual. So while somebody may rank their life as higher than their property, that does not mean to attack property is not an attack on self-ownership. They both are. So murder is an attack on self-ownership, and so is theft. For example, one may choose slavery if they are threatened with death. That does not mean that their rights are not violated because they didn't die. Their rights of self-ownership over their labor and their freedom of movement to not be kidnapped and enslaved are being violated. This individual has valued liberty and his labor as less valuable than his life, but that does not mean his right of self-ownership has not been violated. One may choose to have their wallet or car stolen from them if a gun-wielding assailant demands it, but we would not deny the violation of the rights of self-ownership, right? So just because I choose to give up my wallet instead of getting shot, that does not mean a crime has not been committed against my self-ownership. A lesser crime may have been committed, which means that person, instead of murdering me and facing capital punishment as a possible consequence, may not be appropriate. If they steal from me, they shouldn't necessarily face capital punishment, but it is still a violation of self-ownership. And just because somebody may choose to be enslaved rather than be killed, that does not mean, well, then just their labor is not important, their freedom's not important. It wouldn't make me feel better, even though I may be happy to escape a carjacking with my life. That wouldn't make me feel better for someone to say, you shouldn't care, it's just stuff. It's just material stuff. Person over property. Your person got out, your stuff didn't. You shouldn't care. It's only stuff. That is true. The individual is thankful to emerge from such a situation alive. However, it is unlikely that the individual would appreciate being lectured about having his property stolen is not a violation of his rights of self-ownership, and it's only stuff, and he should care more about his life than his property. That's kind of like asking, would you rather lose a foot or an eye? Well, one may be better or worse relative to the other, and some may choose one over the other if we were forced to. That does not mean that someone would be happy they lost their foot just because they got to keep their eye, or that they lost their eye just because they got to keep their foot. Just because we may rank them, if somebody cuts off or pokes out one over and I get to keep the other, that doesn't mean I haven't been injured. And it's similar with property. Similarly, a peaceful person who has their property destroyed may be happy to be alive relative to the crime, or may not have had a greater crime committed against their life, but a violation of their self-ownership is still committed. Believe it or not, it is possible to believe that taking a human life without the commission of a crime by that individual, worthy of that in self-defense, and the destruction of private property are both wrong. Believe it or not, there are some people who still believe that it's wrong to steal someone's stuff, and it's also wrong to murder them, whether it's committed by individuals, a group, or a government. The difference between violations of body and property are one of degree, not of kind. They're in the same category, while they may not be of the same level of offense. How is property, material stuff, an extension of the right of self-ownership? If self-ownership is granted as a concept, if that is agreed upon, then property logically follows, though not everybody is consistent on believing that. In having an exclusive right to one's body, a right to exclude, being a self-owner, there are needs that are concomitant to the preservation and continuance of life. I own my body, and my body needs things to continue existence and survival. And those things aren't just wants, they are inherent human needs. Now, I don't have a right to the labor of others to fulfill those needs, and they don't have a right to my labor. That's called theft or slavery, are violations, both of them, of the right of self-ownership. So in order to fulfill those needs, I have to manipulate the physical environment in which I live in order to survive. I need oxygen, I need food, I need water, I need clothing, I need shelter. And so I have to either homestead, be given the gift from someone else, or exchange or trade with somebody, whether trading my labor, money, time, whatever it may be, on a voluntary, peaceful level, in order to get the things that I need to survive. As soon as I have done that, any of those items in the physical world for which I am interacting, with which I'm interacting, those things become my property, and they now become an extension of my person and my right of self-ownership. Apples from a tree that I eat to survive, water that I drink from a stream, that stuff that I have utilized becomes mine. Now, there are limits to the homesteading. Can't just dump a cap of red dye in the ocean and claim it all to be mine, but that's a limit that we would have to figure out. But all humans have to homestead, be given gifts, or exchange in order to survive. And then once they do that, if it's legitimate and peaceful and voluntary, that stuff becomes their property, and it continues their survival. And in this process of the mixture of labor with material, human existence continues. And so the physical environment must and may be used for these purposes, and therefore it is an inherent human right. Property is an inherent human right. It is an extension of the right of self-ownership. In addition, once these basic needs are satisfied, human beings ordinarily rank preferences of wants. And if physical materials of the world may be used for needs, they may also be used for wants. And some wants, what were wants, eventually become needs. Think of like transportation, for example. I could live and physically survive without a car, but it has become something of a need in the modern world. And so, while it may be a want, I can access it through those legitimate means to make it my property. It becomes an extension of my self-ownership. That's why it's a violation of my self-ownership if someone steals it, destroys it, harms it, even if they don't take my life. Same with houses, same with businesses. So in addition, once the basic needs are satisfied, humans rank our preferences ordinally. What's the next most important thing? And if the physical materials may be used for needs, they may legitimately be used for wants also. Of course, excluding the violation of the rights of self-ownership of others through aggression, threat of violence, theft, fraud, destruction, that type of thing. It is in this process, followed legitimately in peace and voluntarily in regard to others, that property becomes an extension of human ownership. It is still of less importance than human life. And we recognize that by the fact that if someone gets murdered, that has a higher penalty than if somebody steals someone's wallet or commits arson against someone's home. There are differences there, but that stratification is one of degree, not of kind or category. The right to exclude becomes the right to be human. And it should also be mentioned that while there are realities in the world of unmet needs, we could have added medicine in there as a need. What if I need medicine to help me survive? I have the right to access that through exchange or trade. I have the right to be given that, or I have the right to homestead it. But there are many unmet needs and unmet wants in the world. That is the reality of scarcity. That is the reality of human existence. However, the right of self-ownership of another in order to fulfill a want or need is a violation of those rights. I do not have a right to the labor of others. That is theft. That is slavery. I do not have a right to the things of others, the items of others, the property of others. So it's often claimed people over property, or it's just stuff. But if people argue, rightly so, that human life, the right of self-ownership against the intrusion of others, is violated by some action, and that other humans ought to be concerned, then use an occasion where human life has been taken to participate in or condone or dismiss the destruction of property because it's just stuff, then they're not being consistent with the right of self-ownership. They believe self-ownership, it's okay to violate in some circumstances, but it's not okay to violate in others. And that's inconsistent, that's illogical, that doesn't follow. And it means that they are not consistently on the side of inherent human rights to self-ownership. No one has a right to others. And we bear keeping in mind, the government can take your stuff, that can take your stuff, or refuse to protect your stuff and put you in a cage, can also kill you. Those things are connected. This is ruthlessly consistent logic that power that may take stuff from people, power that may put people in cages, power that may also kill people. If the right of self-ownership may be violated for the lesser level, that of property, then the right of self-ownership may also be violated at the so-called greater level, which means it may violate human life also.